with me, Gurinder Chadha and Huma Qureshi. They say we are not the makers of history, we are history. And it's been 70 years since India's partition, and there are stories that continue to haunt us. If I could say, intrigue us as well. So how come you decided to revisit this period of our history?
Well, like many people who live out of India, partition affected us too. And I grew up in England, in London, under the shadow of partition, because as a child, I was very, very aware that I never had an ancestral homeland, because my homeland of Rawalpindi and Jhelum had become this other country that I couldn't visit. So I had a very dislocated relationship with India, if you like, because it wasn't that kind of Punjab. But also, when I was a young girl, my grandmother came to live with us, and she was quite traumatized about things that she had seen. So as a child, I remember when we would watch television, when any villain came on or any sort of violence or anything, she would say, "Minna, isko band karo," and we'd say, "It's okay, Beji, you're in England now." And she'd go, temne pata kya hua?" And then my grandmother was in Jhelum in August 1947. Like so many people, overnight, there was a lot of violence, and an Indian army truck came, and she and her 5 young children who were with her were told to get on the truck right now. She couldn't even pick up anything. She was on the truck, put on a train, and for 3 days they traveled from Jhelum to India, and the train would stop and start, and no one knew at any point if people were going to come on and kill them, or there was no food, there was no water, and they couldn't even get off the train once they'd crossed the border into India, because there was a lot of cholera and a lot of disease in Amritsar. During that sad period, my youngest aunt, she was 2 at the time, she died of starvation. So my grandmother never really got over that.
There are certain memories that you just can't erase, and as they say, history continues. We all live our parents, our forefathers, their lives. We all are living those lives.
We do, but the film starts with a quote. It says, "History is written by the victors," And it's very important that we understand that we have been told a story of what happened, why India was partitioned, from a particular perspective, a largely British Empire perspective. It suited them to tell the story of partition in the way that I've been told it, which was that in 1947, the British suddenly decided, okay, it was time to go. Not that Gandhi ji had brought them to their knees, just they had decided to go, and we all started fighting with ourselves, Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs. And so Mountbatten, who was a nice chap, who had been sent over to make us all feel civilized and in the handing over of India, suddenly he was confronted with all this violence, and he didn't know what to do, so he divided the country. That's the history books that I have been told growing up in England, and a lot of people here know. But what the film tells you is that is not the truth. There is a different version of history, and as a British Indian, it was important for me, to tell that, different version of British and Indian history.
What was it that made you say, yes, that, it was a period drama?
Well, the partition is definitely a most, sensitive topic in the subcontinent. It's something that still flares up a lot of conversation, and it is something that has affected our lives, our history, politics, everything till today. So I feel a film on this hasn't been made for a very long time, and especially in India, if I was to make a film like this by an Indian director, they'd probably make it a very different sort of a film. It'd be a bit more jingoistic.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
And I think when I read the script and then I met Gurinder, I understood where she was coming from. Here was a filmmaker who was trying to tell a story, a human story, that is supposed to move you. It's going to be a sensitive tale. It's going to touch upon the politics of the time in a sort of a neutral position, without really sort of villainizing anybody or sort of taking a particular side, because it's both British and Indian in that sense. So it's not saying that, oh, it was one particular group's fault. It sort of shares responsibility, collective responsibility for what really happened. And most importantly for me, which is the aspect about the script that I loved was the fact that it talks about common people and how they suffered and their lives and homes, that it was not just a line on a map, it was between people's homes and families and loves.
I think this film is different because it is this very sort of international perspective on those events of 1947. It's also a very healing film. You know, it says this is what happened, but it's not jingoistic. It's not making, hopefully doesn't make you angry, whoever you are, you know. It makes you take some responsibility for what happened, whoever you are. And also in the case of the British, you know, it made them feel very upset, you know, and some people quite guilty for not knowing, you know, exactly some of the tactics of the Raj. Certainly in Britain, people were very happy to see a film that was made 37 years since the last film on the subject, which was Gandhi, made by an Indian person, you know. So in Britain, people were like, yeah, it's time we really looked at the Raj from this perspective. So that was very, you know, very welcoming for me. But the main thing I want to say is that this is a film not only made by a British Indian, it's made by a woman and it's made by a mother. So mothers don't get to make films about great historic, epic occurrences where there was a lot of violence, a lot of trauma, but also a lot of humanity, you know. Mothers don't get to make those kind of big films.